Management Committee for Wednesday, March 10th to order. We are still, do we have a recording?
Yes.
There we go. We are still working under Governor Walz's peacetime emergency, which means we are not doing this meeting in person. The public can tune into the meeting and they can send us questions either ahead of time or during the meeting, and we will do our best to answer all of those questions. The meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and we encourage people to monitor the meeting remotely and engage with us and provide us the feedback that they would like to provide to us. So with that, I'll call the meeting to order, and if we call the roll to confirm quorum, that would be great.
Barber. Gonzalez.
Present.
Johnson.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Lilligren.
Here.
Muse.
Here.
Ferguson.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the agenda has been modified, but the modified agenda has been posted. Are there any changes to the updated agenda where we removed the labor strategy conversation? All right, seeing none, we'll accept that and move forward to approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes for the February 24th meeting?
So moved by Gonzalez.
Okay, is there a second?
Johnson seconds.
Is there any discussion? All right, can we call the roll, please?
Thank you. Gonzalez.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Muse.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have two business items on the agenda today. The first business item is business item 2021-58, award of the Southwest LRT grant anticipation notes within established parameter resolutions, 2021-7 and 2021-8. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, committee members. This is Mark Thompson, Senior Manager of Treasury, and I'm here to present business item 2021-58, award of the Southwest Corridor Light Rail Transit Project General Obligation Grant Anticipation Notes within established parameters. And just as a background and a reminder, the Southwest Corridor Light Rail Transit Project is being funded by both local partners and by a grant the council executed with the Federal Transit Administration in September of 2020. And the local partners have fulfilled most of their funding commitments, which was a little over half of the project expense. And under the full funding grant agreement with the FTA, the council will receive grant payments on a reimbursement basis over the next 10 years. And because these grant payments are spread out over a 10-year period, while the actual project expenses are concentrated in the next 1 to 3 years, some interim cash flow funding is needed. And to accomplish this, the council approved a cash flow financing plan in November of 2020, which included issuance of a series of grant anticipation notes, or GANs as they're called, to provide that cash flow that's needed. So the first issuance of GANs we did last December, and that cash flow, the cash flow that was provided by those GANs is projected to be exhausted in May. So this business item proposes the planned second issuance of GANs, which will provide $435 million of funding, which is projected to fund project expenses into early 2022. This debt will be repaid with future grant payments. We've been working with our financial advisor to structure this deal, and after they have surveyed a number of potential investors in the GANs, And the recommending, we split these GANs into two different series. One series will be a short-term series with maturities from 1 to 4 years, and the second series will have maturities from 5 to 8 years. And this split into two series will allow investors to bid on one or both of the series, and targets both short-term investors and long-term investors. And it'll give the investors flexibility and ensure a broad bidding participation and the lowest interest rates possible for the council. The proposed resolutions 2021-7 and 2021-8 authorize the issuance of the two GAN series. They define acceptable financial parameters for the terms of the notes and allow staff to award the sale of the notes to the lowest bidder within those terms. The chart in the rationale section of the business item shows the parameters. Both series must be issued within the next 90 days. The total issuance between the two series cannot exceed 436.5 million. Series B, which is the shorter series, cannot exceed 2%, and Series C, the longer series, cannot exceed 2.5%. Now, we expect the interest cost to be significantly less than that. This financing action supports the Thrive Lens outcome of stewardship by providing low-cost funding for the council's capital projects. So, Mr. Chair, the proposed action is the Metropolitan Council adopt parameters resolutions 2021-7 and 2021-8, which authorize the sale, issuance, and award of general obligation debt within established financial parameters, the incurrence of related issuance expenses, and the execution of necessary documents to secure the financing. Thank you.
Are there any questions from council members? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to approve business item 2021-58?
Moved by Lee.
All right, is there a second?
Second by Barber.
Okay, any discussion? All right, seeing none, can we call the roll, please?
Barber. Aye. Gonzalez.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Musse.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye,
Thank you.
thank you. All right, our second business item is 2021-59, award the refunding and park bonds within the established parameter resolutions. Mark?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'll now present business item 2021-59. This business item, approximately annually, the council issues bonds to fund projected cash flow needs for our divisions for the subsequent 12 months based on the capital budget. And currently, the new bonding needed is $6 million for parks. This includes the Parks Capital Program and the Parks Reimbursement Program. Metro Transit and Environmental Services do not need bond funding at this time. The Parks bonds will be done in two series and will be paid with property tax levies. Also, in addition to the park bonds, the continued low interest rate environment provides us an opportunity to refinance 3 outstanding wastewater bond issues, totaling about $104 million of outstanding bonds, and realize significant future interest cost savings. These were bonds that were originally issued in 2012 and 2014. Refunding these 3 outstanding issues is projected to save about $1.5 million annually in interest costs and about $12.7 million in total. So it's significant cost savings that will be realized over the remaining life of the bonds, which is about 12 years. This debt will continue to be paid from wastewater system revenues. As shown in the rationale section, each proposed resolution authorizes staff to award the bonds to the best bidder within specific financial parameters. There are 2 parks-related resolutions, 2021-9, which is for the tax-exempt series, These bonds must be issued within 90 days. They cannot exceed 3.1 million, and they must not exceed 2%. Resolution 2021-10 is for the Parks Taxable Series. Again, they must close within 90 days, cannot exceed 3.1 million, and must not exceed 2.25%. And last, Resolution 2021-11 for the Wastewater Refunding Series. Again, these bonds must close within 90 days. They cannot exceed 104.5 million and must realize a minimum savings of 3% in future interest costs as required by county policy or council policy. We expect, just an idea, we expect savings over 10.6%. And as I mentioned, that's about 12.7 million. So significant savings that we expect. These financing actions support the Thrive's outcomes of sustainability and stewardship, as issuing general obligation bonds is a efficient and cost-effective mechanism to provide the funding needed to preserve capital infrastructure, and refunding bonds result in future interest cost savings. So, Mr. Chair, the proposed action is the Metropolitan Council adopt the 3 parameters resolutions, 2021-9, 2021-10, and 2021-11, which authorize the issuance, sale, and award of general obligation debt within established financial parameters, the incurrence of related issuance expenses, and execution of necessary documents to secure the financing. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions on this business item? Mark, just one for you. Are there any other bonds that we have that we're looking at refinancing with low interest rates and with the prospect that they might start rising at some point in the future?
Yeah, well, we're constantly, along with our financial advisor, constantly evaluating all of our outstanding bond issues. At this time, we don't have any that we foresee doing in the near future. It depends on the call dates that are on the bonds that are existing, as far as when we can call them or not. But so the answer is not in an immediate future, but we're constantly evaluating.
Okay.
Bonds. Yeah.
Any other questions on this business item? We get a motion to approve business item 2021-59.
Johnson moves.
Is there a second? Lilligren
Lilligren
second.
second.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other discussion? Can we call the roll, please?
Barber. Aye. Gonzalez.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lee.
Aye.
Lilligren.
Aye.
Musse.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the business items that we have on the agenda today. We did, Councilmember Sterner and I serve on the investment committee. We did receive an investment committee report from Treasury Manager Thompson a couple of weeks ago, and so it's available here. We wanted to, if people have questions, we'll get those answered, but we wanted to spend most of our remaining time on our second information item and see if we can get that closed out so we can get people starting to work on that. So, but if people want to go through the first information item, and if you have questions, please send them to Mr. Thompson, and he will get those answered to you. But I think, the quick summary is that, markets are up, so pension funds are in good shape. Interest rates are down, so borrowing costs are low. Oil is starting to rise. So that's probably the 3 big things that are going to impact our budget going forward. But if people need any more information on what's in the report, you can send us questions and we can get those answered for you.
Mr.
So
Chair,
yes.
and just briefly, I believe it was approved, and I'll be serving as chair of that committee, and I'm really excited about that. So I want to get up to speed, but really have a great interest in this, and happy then to connect back to management, of course. So you guys are experts in this, and look for your guidance, but it's an opportunity I'm looking forward to.
Great. I did not realize there was a change from Councilmember Stoner. So wonderful. All right. So with that, then we will move on to our second business item, our second information item that we have, which is looking to allocate the equity funds that we had set aside in our budget. And so what we've done, Mary had reached out to all the council members and got sort of assessments from everybody. And I think we have that. Do we have that to share, Mary? So what I want to do is go through each one of at least the top ones. I think there's some fairly clear priorities. And for some of them, there were some comments about, whether or not it would make sense to fund more than the original amount asked. And so we have some of the people, the proposers of those various items, and at least the top three or sort of 4 or 5, what we'll probably do is really maybe ask that question: does the money requested get all of the things done that we're wanting to get done sort of as quickly as we can, or should we be thinking about allocating some more funds, for example, to bring more people into a particular training program, or is the program as big as it can be with the needs that we have for people? So we'll go through those items. I think we'll bring those up.
So,
now.
Mr. Chair, I need Greg to bring up the other document, not the presentation, but the PDF file that he got today. Otherwise, Greg, if you let me share, I can share it.
Go ahead, Mary. You should be able to share.
All right. Let me see here. Oh, I see Lori's got it up on the screen here. Lori, can you make it a little larger, please? Okay, so the process that we went through is I sent this out to the committee members and asked them to rank their choices. And the score that you see on...
Lori, maybe just a couple of clicks larger on your view size. There we go.
How's that? Okay.
Yep.
So the scoring is a little bit of a weighted score. So if somebody ranked it a 1, it got 10 points. If 2 people ranked it a 1, it got 20 points. If it was at 2, 9 points, kind of down the line like that. Anything over a 10 didn't get a score. So not everybody ranked every one, but I think this ranking still brought us to some good cutoffs between what kind of rose to the top and those that are at the next level. So top 5, pretty clear in the 30s. The number 6, I want to talk about that one a little bit differently because it is a large dollar amount. And I think we may have an opportunity to fund that a little bit differently. You could consider doing a budget amendment to spend general fund reserves. Marie Henderson, our acting CFO, tells me we've got about $7 million over target in the general fund. And so we could consider maybe meeting the need that's asked for here or some other amount more or less than that through a budget amendment using general fund reserve rather than tapping the general purpose levy for that amount. The reason that I put that forward primarily is because in the general fund, remember that regional administration and community development are funded from the general fund. Regional administration costs are allocated to the divisions. So the regional administration does not add to general fund reserves. Community development does add to general fund reserves if they come under budget. And so the reserves over target that we have in that fund are generally come from community development. So it seems like a good fit potentially for transferring some of that into this program. So that's a consideration for you as we go through these. So, Mr. Chair, how would you like to go through? Do you just want to start at
Yeah,
with the
let's
top
maybe
five?
start at, yeah, let's start with the top five. Maybe we'll start at number one and work our way to 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then I think if council members have questions, I think based on the data that we have, we would be probably recommending at least these 5. And then the question would be is what is the right amount to fund in each one of these categories for the year. And then if there's some others that we really want to look at, we can do that. And I think it's important to note the ones that are below that top 5 doesn't mean they won't necessarily get done. It just means that we may look for divisions to try to find the money in their existing budget or from other sources to do that some of that work. So let's start with the first one, which is the reducing racial disparities through advancing equity in contracting. And I think that one as we were looking at it, is probably a little bit more broad than that because I think we had some HR components to that as well as OEO as well as procurement. So maybe we could just remind us what all's in there, and then I think the question to those 3 people would be, are there things that we could move along faster if there was some additional funding above the 500,000 that we were putting into that effort? So that would be Cy, Jody, and Marcy.
Good afternoon, Chair, Council members. As a refresh, the first one is a combined effort with HR, procurement, and the Office of Equal Opportunity. And so the 3 areas are the financial incentives for exceeding income goals, and that would be payment to contractors that go above and beyond the goals. And we're looking for a pilot project, and it would fund one pilot would be for construction, the second would be for goods and services. And then the second would be council contractor technical training incentives. It would be led by HR and their workforce unit. And that would be to support apprenticeships and payment to subcontractors for that, or for contractors for that training as well. And then the third.
So just given that we're just narrowing these down right already, just how much are you allocating to each one of those, and what do you think that will get us done? And is there something we should be? Would we get more done if we allocated some additional funds to each one of those 3 areas, just as you go through them?
Great questions. And so for the first one, for the financial incentives, we're asking for $125,000. $75,000 would be for major construction incentive, $50,000 for professional or technical services. We had more to fund. We would do more than one pilot for each of those areas of major construction and professional and technical services. And then for number 2, council contractor technical training incentives, Marcy can weigh in as well, but that would be the cost of $200,000. There is a question about this that we'd be asking for $100,000 for a 2-year pilot project.
So $100,000 this year, $100,000 next year?
Correct.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is there a way that we can get that breakdown? And maybe I missed it I don't know if it was in the link or not, but is there a way we could get those breakdowns? Because I'm not remembering it all, in some kind of an overview or after today?
Chair, Councilmember Johnson, yes, we can certainly provide that. And we do have a detailed memo that breaks down the costs for each and also the measures associated with them.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, may I go?
Councilor Musi, go ahead.
Hey, Cynthia, is there any reason why we are not including transportation into this, the column? Transportation, healthcare transportation contracts? Can you hear me?
Chair, Councilmember Muse, and so could you reframe the question? what
So
I
basically,
understood.
basically, in equity in contracting is a possibility for in there to include transit contracts. We do have a metro transit contracts that are really big and huge, and we know it's a very high barrier for folks of color, and that has been an issue for folks complaining about they cannot access it. So is there a opportunity in this area to really handle some of that issue?
Chair, Councilmember Muse, yes, that would be covered in our area number 3, and that's where we're looking to foster MCUB businesses, but also use our engagement unit for working with our other small businesses as well. And so we do have one ongoing business that we're currently engaged with in getting them connected to, I believe you're referring to our Metropolitan Transportation Service contracts,
Yes.
where we typically don't set goals on those because they are heavy around employment and labor versus goods and services or construction projects. And so that's where we would be dedicating our efforts in that third area around connection with those businesses and development in a variety of different supportive services that are needed for the businesses to engage with the council and contract with the council beyond goal setting.
Thank you.
And just as a follow-on to Councilmember Mushi's, I think, thought process is it probably does make sense for us to think about some, maybe more than one pilot in each area so they can cover some different business units and sort of see how that the spend pilot that you referred to in that, I think it's the first one you talked about. Because sometimes if we just do one, let's say for Metro Transit, that may not be representative of how it might work in some of the other areas that we would engage. So I think it would make sense to look at some additional funds so we can do maybe 2 or 3 in construction and 2 or 3 in the goods and services side.
Mr. Chair.
Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm toggling back and forth between the presentation and the spreadsheet. So I asked this at the last meeting, and I ranked this high, and I know we've been talking about it for some time, and so it's really great to see this. So how I know how we're gonna, I see what we're collecting for data, I see what we're tracking. I know there are many more details beyond the presentation, but what are we doing to somehow spur on some scaling and sustainability so that this will grow and it won't be just a one-time demonstration? What components of this program will there be so that people don't, do what we want them to do, hopefully, get a financial benefit, and then it kind of ends there?
Chair, Councilmember Johnson, that's a great question. And so what we're doing is that this work will be incorporated within the areas that are already established. And so, for example, in the human resources area that is led by Aaron Koski, this would kickstart an initiative that would continue on. So as we find success in this program, they'll be able to embed that program within the work that they're already doing and establishing training and opportunities for construction services. And so currently, as it works, they are utilizing community organizations as well as connections with labor organizations to get interest of participants to do training, and they go through a hands-on training. And there's a lot of communications that's been done around that called Building Strong Communities. This is an extension of that then once they reach a level of training, they can then have experience on the job and connection with additional union training. And then we would support in the cost of that with the contractors and continuing that training. So again, as we find success in that program, that can be embedded in the work that's already happening within that area. And then when it comes to our engagement and development unit and kickstarting that work, we will certainly be continuing those supportive services to those businesses, helping them to really scale up, as you indicated, their opportunity to contract with the council. And not just with the council, we'll be giving them the skills development, supportive services they need to be able to engage across the state of Minnesota. So we're going to be leveraging our partnerships with MnDOT, also with Department of Administration and with PTAC as well.
And Mr. Chair, so are any of those other organizations willing to kick in some money on this program since they'll benefit from it too? And once the money goes away, there will have been benefit accrued and we'll have more people trained and in the know. And then we're just hoping, because we've got some momentum there, that without the incentives and additional funding, we can still carry forward this momentum to reach, further goals in the future. Two-part question.
Yeah, Chair, Councilmember Johnson, yes, those organizations already have funding. For example, MnDOT receives federal funding for some of the services that they already have in play. And so Met Council will be setting up our own services unit, making sure, one, that we're independent, but also leveraging that relationship and joining in where they've already created those opportunities instead of recreating the wheel. And so we'll be contributing to programs that have already been established and then independently setting up our own programming as well.
And I think, it's important to note, Councilman Johnson, that they're really sort of three separate things, right? So, the first is providing incentives for contractors, sort of, at least the original thinking was similar to the incentives we used when we built the Green Line or Central Corridor for community impact incentives. So the contractor was rated by the community. Small incentives led to pretty significant change in behavior by the contractor. And so the thought here is, as a test, as a pilot, would be if we provided some small incentives to contractors, would it lead them to try to exceed their MCUB numbers that they would have as a result of being able to achieve some of those incentives. So that's the first one. That's sort of the pilot. And I think the question is how many pilots would it make sense to run to be able to test to see if that works, right? So the sense would be, let's say normally we have 7-8% MCUB participation. If on these contracts, we're ending up at 16, 17, 20%, then we would view that as a great success, and but you'd be able to measure that. So does it make sense to just do 2 to try to test that, or is that enough of a pool of pilots to be able to know if it works or not, or more? The job training one, I think is fairly self-explanatory. But then the building capacity piece, that's the one that I think has great opportunity to partner with other agencies. And there are lots of agencies that are doing lots of different things. And I think, SI has led a fair amount of work on trying to bring people together and have things be a little bit more, or have things be more coordinated amongst the agencies, and try to make it easier for the businesses that are engaging with all the various agencies. That work is not necessarily easy to do, just because every government agency, every city, every county has their own silo of work that they do. And but SI has been working across those silos to try to break them down as much as we can and coordinate with others. But that's the spot where there is some opportunity, I think, to have more collaboration and see, and that may be something that we as policymakers may need to weigh in with policymakers at some of these other agencies to break down some of those barriers so that SI and her peers can be better enabled to work together and do things more efficiently for that space.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really appreciate that. And I think I'm super, into this. And I think mostly I was trying to focus on that first part, just making sure that, the incentives that we have, will go away at some point, unless we want to, continue the program. And then we really have to talk about that. I'm just hoping that, that somehow the incentive that somebody accrues to bump up the numbers, will forward into that type of behavior without incentives, and trying to just understand what the nexus is between changing behavior. You run a pilot and you go, oh yeah, we gave this much money and they took it and the numbers went up. And I guess I'm very excited about it, but I'm also concerned that when the money goes away, Will the numbers, stay at least consistent to where they left off at? Will they decline or will they increase? I'm just trying to figure out what changes behavior long term. I'll watch and learn on this. I'm not trying to, I might
No.
sound like I'm not supportive. I'm just trying to understand how, money over a pretty short period of time will play into change behavior on the broader scale when others get involved. So I'm sure we'll share a lot of that data and I'm excited to watch, but I hope for really good outcomes.
And I think that's a good example. So that may be one where incentives would have to, the thought would be it may be something that after we get through this pilot, that may be something we're looking to have in our budget permanently to be able to incent this kind of work. So the thought is that if sort of the normal course of business is 7 or 8% participation for minorities and women and veteran subcontractors in these contracts, there's probably an increased cost for the contractor to go out and find more subcontractors and work with more subcontractors. So they'll weigh that increased cost with the increased benefit that we're providing as part of the contract. And if those two are equal or they make a little bit extra on the contract as a result of adding more women suppliers or more minority suppliers, then they're going to go out and do that. So the pilot here is to see if this works in changing behavior. And then I think, long term, we would have to decide as a council, is it a big enough priority for us to continue to make that investment to incentivize that behavior? It can't be race based, but it's all of our disadvantaged business based. It's no different than the debate we're having, for example, on buses, right? We're making the decision. Many people feel very strongly we should spend more money on buses that are environmentally friendly than buses that are less environmentally friendly, and it's a significant amount more. But we're making that choice as an agency, and as to say that it makes sense to make that investment for the betterment of our environment. And what we're looking at is doing a pilot here to say, does it make sense if we make these kinds of investments? Will it lead to better outcomes for these subcontractors and change the behavior and get people more included in the work?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I just, so majority population, white, male, whatever, just trying to, general contractor would be the one receiving the incentive, but then that person, it just as for instance, would be incentivized then to contract with disadvantaged businesses or minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, get those numbers up. So, and to talk about putting it in our budget for the future. I mean, I really hope that we can get to a place where that money, if it's going to flow somewhere, flows. And I hope the money can just flow to those businesses directly, or increase their wages or their fees on the project too. That's where I'm trying to go, is how do we, if we're going to make an investment, I know this is a good idea, but, talking about putting in a budget permanently, which sometimes these things do, I eventually want to get it where, our tax dollars, if this is a goal, incentivized or not, reach directly those people that we're looking to have tied to our projects more robustly than they are today.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we've heard from some of the larger, not that there's many of them, but larger minority-owned and women-owned firms is that they naturally are contracting more and working with more firms that are like their company. And so this gives them an opportunity, because they're many times they're investing in those firms and either directly or just are trying to bring them along and help them grow. This gives them an incentive to do that. And they're not getting the incentive up front, right? The way that the thought is that they would have to achieve certain performance metrics. And if they achieve those metrics, then they would get the incentive. If they didn't, then they wouldn't get that incentive. So,
Thank you, Chair and Councilmember Johnson, and we appreciate your comments and they're well received. With regard to the first item and the second item, yes, that funding would go to the contractors. With the first one for exceeding goals, we would certainly be taking a look at the benefit that we receive and measuring that impact before we make determinations of continuing on with that service and programming. And then with the second one, where the funds do go directly to the contractor, it would be to provide on the job training resources for the employees, and we'd be able to measure the success of that and continue that within our own council programming. And then with regard to number 3, that money would be directly utilized for the small businesses themselves and also for continued programming and supportive services directly for the small businesses.
Okay. Any other questions on this first item? Okay, let's go to item number 2, expanding multicultural marketing reach and frequency. Any questions on that?
Oh, Mr. Chair, if I could, are we, is this money, so I have to look at the presentation again, but so is, since we're trying to do this across the councils, essentially, right, expanding, marketing and reach and frequency to diverse communities. So I'm just hoping that, this, trying to just, I know we have to, there are silos and departments and funds and budgets that we work within and all of that, but I just hope too that we're talking about this across the council, and it seems like various departments and divisions are at various stages of this. So I guess all I'm asking is if whatever we do and whatever we learn here, that again, it's multidisciplinary and can be shared throughout the council. I think this is really important. It's only about the 50th time we've talked about this in, last year perhaps. So it's good to see there's money coming to do it. I'm just hoping again that that ultimately it has staying power and we change our own procedures and how we do things. So that's all I'll say about that.
Okay. And this one was targeted to Metro Transit, was the one that made the proposal originally. So, all right, the third one we have is any other questions on that one? Okay. The third one we have is the Environmental Youth Job Skills Program. Any questions on this? And there's a comment on this one that we would, I think there's a question for the presenters or the proposers. If there was more money available, could you bring more people into the program?
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I'm Ned Smith. I'm the Director of Finance for Environmental Services. I think there's always an opportunity. I wonder if we shouldn't start small to make sure that we get it right. And then if it is successful, the program could grow from there. My other concern is, we are pretty much operating on flat head count over time. And I'd be worried about if we had a lot of folks in this program at the end of 2 years, where would they go? So that's just me speaking from a finance perspective. I'm just seeing this question now, but I would feel more comfortable if I could check in with Jen and Aaron, Jen Zuhowski and Aaron Koski for their thoughts on that as well. But my biggest concern is what do we do at the other end of the pipeline? Because I'm not sure we'd have spots for all of them to go.
Gotcha. Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Councilman Johnson.
on this one, I didn't rank it very highly, and that was actually one of my thoughts. Again, it's a short-term deal, so how do we, again, ensure that there's some sustainability and it's got some staying power? It can be scaled into other divisions or agencies. I don't know. So yeah, we can do something for a set amount of time, and then what? I'm trying to get to the and then what? We do a lot of things at Met Council that are really, really good, but then what? So because we have these big goals and we're very serious about it, and we're 2 years into our terms, just trying to understand, on the backside of the programs, then what? So I appreciate Mr. Smith's comments because that was actually one of the things I thought. And not that I don't value the program, I'm just trying to understand if we make the investment, what's the return on the investment? And if I can't understand that clearly, it might have been ranked a little lower, not saying that the program wouldn't be good. I'm not seeing as a policymaker how we're gonna, transform and hit some of our goals by doing some of these things. I'm not saying that it's not possible. I'm not able to connect the dots yet quite clearly on some of this.
Okay. Any other comments on this item? So SAC grants for affordable housing is the next one. There's a question about has SAC grants, SAC assistance for small business been discussed as well?
So, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I think the short answer on that is no. We started this really wanting to focus on affordable housing. I can tell you that the concerns that were expressed by metro cities would be even greater on this particular item. And it would be a concern for us as well in terms of the integrity of the SAC program. That concern being, where do you stop? So if it's affordable housing and then it's small BIPOC entrepreneurs, what's after that? Is it homeless shelters? Is it daycare centers? Part of what makes SAC successful is that everybody pays. And so again, the concern there is the precedent. And really trying to just keep it focused on affordable housing.
And I guess what we're doing here, though, is the SAC fee will still be paid. It'll just be paid by this grant as opposed to being paid by the affordable housing complex or by the BIPOC-owned business if we went that way. It's not that the SAC fund will be short the money.
Mr. Chair, that is correct, and that is what gives me comfort with this program as it's defined, is that we know that SAC fee will be paid by the equity grant and will not be distributed across the rest of the rate base. But again, the concern, and I know this, the concern is kind of, well, if you did it for them, why can't you do it for others? And again, the challenge there would be then we just need to make sure that that's funded.
Right, and we have a number of grants, obviously, that are oversubscribed. That in different areas, that some people get money and some people don't get money, whether it's cleanup grants or different grants, right? So we'd have to treat it in the same way, where there's a limited pool and people could apply, and we'd have to have a process for awarding those grant dollars and knowing that the maximum amount would be whatever was decided to be allocated to that program, and we couldn't go above that because otherwise we'd be pulling money away in a way that we haven't done and wouldn't want to do, right? Okay.
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
So I'm not sure who suggested that, but
that's
I guess
me,
in theory,
Mr. Chair, and I have a question about that. And so I thought it would be obvious because of during my time on the Minneapolis City Council.
I didn't want to assume.
And actually, I think a lot of those comments are mine. I was quite an active commenter on this spreadsheet. But here, and I was wondering if Mr. Smith can tell me how much of a barrier the SAC fees have been to creating affordable units, just because I've never heard that iterated as a reason, a prohibitive reason to creating a unit. I have heard it many times during my time on the Minneapolis City Council as a barrier to a small business. And that's what generated the comment, or I guess a question now. How big of a barrier is that? I mean, do we have data on that? Have we identified SAC fees as a barrier to creating affordable units?
So, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I have seen many reports of development fees in general are barriers to housing and affordable housing in particular. If you add up all of the expenses, regulatory expenses, that is one of the things that makes it difficult to generate affordable housing. So I think anything we can do here that helps with that burden would be helpful. I would offer for, I do not have any data for small business. I would offer our SAC deferral program, and we often do for smaller businesses where they can take that, and particularly if it's a small business, that SAC fee can be spread out over 5 to 10 years, depending on the city. But definitely Minneapolis does have that program, and it's quite successful.
Yeah, and the one thing
Thanks.
from that might be useful, not that we necessarily need to budget for here, is that I do hear from businesses. It's hard for, if you've never had a building or started a restaurant or done something before, the SAC fees often seem to people to be a surprise at the end of their process. And so finding a way for businesses to more clearly understand what those fees would be, not just our fee, but maybe we could have a process for giving them an estimate, but what all those fees would be, because they go out and get bank financing, and then they come to the end and they're short $100,000 or they're short $50,000 because of the water hookup fees and the sewer hookup fees and the SAC fees, which are city fees, and then the SAC fees and all of the other, some of these other fees. And that might be something in itself, even if people know what it is, they can budget for it and they can plan for it and they can be ready for it. So that doesn't mean we're paying for it, but we are very much helping them along in that process.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, we have done extensive outreach along those lines, and of course, we always appreciate anyone else who wants to tout that line for and promote that awareness. But we have worked with small business associations across the Twin Cities, retail shop, strip mall developer associations, small business, neighborhood development associations, and then we also partner with our city staff to make sure they have awareness. We also have a SAC calculator on the website where you can enter the basics of your business, and it will tell you what the SAC fee will be. But to your point, that's only if you know SAC exists, and so that's always an outreach effort for us. And we would welcome any further thoughts or ideas for how we can get that word out, because we are always looking for willing ears.
Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I still have concerns with this one, similar to some of the things that Patty Nauman expressed from Metro Cities. To me, it's number one, I don't know that this is going to be as impactful as we would want one of these programs that we're directing this money towards. I also don't know that it's going to really be something that we see an impact regionally. And then the other concern I have is we do something like this, and then a building gets these SAC grants, and then maybe starts out as affordable housing, but then rolls over to market rate or something like that. And I think this is I think the one thing with SAC is we all know, like everyone, whether you're a business, a homeowner, apartment developer, it's kind of a constant and a known expense. And I think that, the things that are going to get conflated and be trouble for product or getting these projects are actually some of the local fees, their local SAC and WAC charges and things like that, really, get triggered off of this. So I honestly, I don't know if I could vote for this whole slate of things with that one included.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. I want to second everything that's been said. I ranked this as number 11. However, on the manufactured home program, I ranked it higher. And here's my thoughts. So I'm going to second everything that's been said. I think if we go down this path, I think it's a bit dangerous because I think it's the camel's nose under the tent. And so, it's a one-time grant. I agree. Anything would help, but, there's, an endless amount of line items in an affordable housing budget that they are desperate for money to fill their stack of gaps or, offsets costs. So I don't like this approach. I agree with Metro Cities, even though it's coming out of a different fund. It's not coming out of the SAC fund. It's just like, for any city people who may remember when fiscal disparities was given exemption so that the Mall of America could take some money and put it into their economic development plan, which right or wrong, but everybody else, in city community really was up in arms because it starts to erode a program in its integrity and, to what benefit. So I don't think I can support this either. I do appreciate the intent. I will also, echo what's been said, and I really appreciate what Councilmember Lilligren said too. For my 20 years on the city council, a small business, especially restaurant, bar, or even, the businesses that are in manufacturing that have water processes, and all of that to do their production. It is a huge expense. It can be a huge barrier. And I also agree that there's a lot of information. If they don't know about their SAC and WAC charges, boy, I hope they are lined up with people who in the development community helping them get their project forward should know that and should be advising them. As far as it relates to local fees, everybody wants the cities to reduce their park dedication fees or whatever the fee might be, but it just pushes the burden onto somebody else. They're not magical fees. They're calculated. There are real expenses. They accrue to the people who are using them as benefits. And so I'm nervous on this one. But I do like the program that didn't get enough points where, as an example, for manufactured home parks, I learned that when I came on Met Council, Corcoran had one of those where it was very affordable. And I think the owner was thinking of selling, or it was at risk of going away as an affordable place for people to live, but it needed to connect and redo its sewer and water. And so Met Council actually came in and said, listen, we've got a grant that we can make available so we can preserve these homes. That's where I think you get more return on investment or impact, because we're saving, dozens of affordable places that already exist that are in great jeopardy if we don't do it. So, that's the type of program where, there's a direct correlation to save units, especially in a community that didn't have a lot of affordable housing, as an example. So I agree with so far with what's been said, and don't really think I can support this one, even though I appreciate the intent.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just want to point out that we do have a statute, Minnesota Statute 473255 for inclusionary housing, that says the council may work with municipalities and developers to provide incentives to inclusionary housing development, such as a waiver of service availability charges and other regulatory incentives, goes on. If we do this, it would be recommended that we do it through the LCA program. So we'd be moving funds into the LCA program to align with the statute. So I don't know if that changes people's thoughts on this, but I think it may get us by the concern of Minnesota cities.
Mr. Chair, for me, I do appreciate that. It's always good to follow state law. So Mary, thanks for having that at the tip of your fingers if you're bringing it up. I still have a lot of concerns, and it's kind of a hate-love relationship that cities have with this. But again, I appreciate that we can do it through LCA, and that would be the place to do it. I'd need a lot more convincing just for me.
Other council members' thoughts on this one? Councilmember Lee.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I understand the concerns too, because coincidentally, I'm also getting constituent outreach about SAC charges right now. But I just think it's a creative way for us to do something in a more in a bold manner that I think would be an interesting way to kind of think outside the box. So that's why I like the innovation idea of it.
Councilmember Amuse. If you're talking, you're on mute, Abdi.
I said I understand the concern that many of my colleagues expressed, but I'm a yes vote on this one.
Okay, and Councilmember Gonzalez.
Yes.
Okay. So, and I think to be clear, we're not voting on a slate of things. It's really us providing guidance to staff. It's an item that's already been budgeted, so which is why it's not a business item; it's an information item. So it's our sort of opportunity to weigh in on how the 3.9 million should be allocated by the staff team. So it's not so technically from a vote perspective, there's not really a vote to say yes or no. It's more just where people's heads are at. I guess the question would be: would it make sense to have $500,000 in some other use in affordable housing to increase equity? To encourage affordable housing projects? Because I think the money for the developers, the money is somewhat fungible, right? Whether they get it for SAC charges or they get it, you can call it you getting it for whatever. That part doesn't make much difference to them. But I think that would be a question for the group.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, community development and the members who serve with me on that, we've just gone through a lot, and the Met Council just approved the work that Tara Beard was leading up. And we have a significant change in the way we are scoring for equity and putting funding now behind equity in the Livable Communities Act funds that we are working on. So, I mean, if we want to throw an additional amount of money towards that work, because it's directly tied and indirectly tied to equity more broadly, I could be supportive of that. I mean, to just be so narrowly focused on SAC, I don't know, but I think there's a lot of ways, to your point, Mr. Chair, that developers are looking for that funding. And if they're rising to the challenge of meeting those points that we're requiring and meeting the goals that we're requiring, I think, this could be some great incentive money that could be more broadly applied and not really limited to SAC. So I do like the point you make, Mr. Chair. And trust me, community development, and we reviewed it recently at the council level. I think there's always money to be put out there, and maybe it could be more broadly applied.
So, Mr. Chair, it might be helpful to have Lisa Barajas comment on this one and whether or not the changes that are going through community development as it relates to housing would be better served by having funds go into the local housing incentives account than through a grant program like this. So that's one point. And then the second point, well, you're not voting on these. I think for transparency, we would still want to bring a business item to the council with the recommendation from the management committee of the programs that we're going to be funding with this money, even though it won't require a budget amendment unless we decide to use additional general fund reserves for any one of these.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, council members, for the record, Lisa Barajas, Community Development Director. Councilmember Johnson, I appreciate your point on putting more funds generally into livable communities. I think it would be helpful for staff to know if the goal is to push affordable housing specifically. If that is the case, I would recommend that we target it in the local housing incentives account. But as community development members know, we've been talking about furthering equity in all of the programs. So it would be helpful for us to know which program you'd like us to target those dollars in, whether it's in the overall Livable Communities demonstration account, in the text-based revitalization account where we do our contamination cleanup, in the TOD account in particular, because they do they're on different funding cycles because of the partners we work with in those. With LHIA, the local housing incentives account being with Minnesota Housing, we have to program our dollars in concert with them. TBRA, we program our dollars in concert with DEED and the PCA. So knowing which account you would be most interested in targeting those funds in would be helpful for us. And that is really dependent on what your goals are.
Have you, as you guys have done this work, have you sort of figured out which of those programs does the most to drive equity?
Mr. Chair, that is a really great question and very difficult because they do specific, because they have such specific funding eligibility. The brownfield contamination cleanup is just for that. That's what it does, is clean up polluted lands. So it's almost an apples and oranges comparison.
Mm-hmm.
We try to see them all as a complete package of programs that from big start to finish in the development program, including pre-development, which is a subcategory, that we are as a whole suite of programs furthering equity in the region and using each of those tools to remove barriers to development across the region, as well as supporting increased participation and better community engagement as part of the development timeline and trajectory.
Mr. Chair? Oh.
Councilmember Lilligren.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, whoever I'm jumping in front of. But yeah, thanks, Lisa, for that explanation. This really reflects and sort of parallels discussion that we had in the most recent Community Development Committee meeting on this topic. And one of the things that really struck me during the discussion and debate is about our priorities. And so, you know, which are advancing equity, that's one question. Which are creating more affordable housing stock, I think, is another important question, right? And since we've seen the housing market or housing production sort of rebound or increase since the economic downturn, of course, that's at the most profitable end of the market, the higher end of the market. And so my feeling is that the more that we can be specific about affordable housing and creating incentives to adding to the housing stock. That's what we need to do in the region, right? Add to the housing stock at the affordable end. I think that is worthwhile. It's not specifically an equity initiative, but it's the part of the market that I think would benefit. The affordable end is the part of the market that I think would benefit from any kind of additional support that we can give it.
Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I do appreciate Councilmember Lilligren's point of the need to direct money towards affordable housing rather than very specifically to that. My one concern of directing this equity initiative money towards the Livable Communities program is we had so many cities leave the Livable Communities program that, you know, I would want to understand why that happened and how those communities are impacted as well. So I would have a hard time with that one too.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Really great points by Councilmember Lilligren, and thank you, Councilmember Barber, for raising that, because I knew about that, but you're right. The eligible cities, which I think will expand in the future, but for right now have contracted quite a bit. So if there's a way to broadly put $500,000 for affordable housing in a way that it doesn't limit it to a specific amount of, you know, number of cities and broadens it beyond the SAC grant. And if there's, you know, again, I think Councilmember Lilligren's point was good in that the low to moderate income affordable housing that we have such a shortage of, by just the data out there, helps our BIPOC community because, you know, they're still not at the place that white community is. So I don't know how you tie it all together, but I think there's a will to put it into some sort of affordable housing. An equity component for me would be big, but I think, again, I would like there to, you know, have the broadest availability for people to access this. And I don't know where we go from here.
Mr. Chair?
Councilmember Barber.
I have a thought. I don't know what it would look like, but one of the big things that we find, and I think this does apply to whether it's Minneapolis or St. Paul or even some of the smaller communities like Carver or Chaska that I represent, issues that come up in building affordable housing is sort of those things that how do you present the need for affordable housing in your community to get the collective community will behind a project. One way that we could potentially impact things is basically almost help build a toolkit for cities and communities to be able to use to help as they're going out to their city councils, to their communities, to get these affordable housing developments built. I know that I've heard that a need for that expressed in both the counties that I work with, and that could be something that could be impactful because then, you know, whether it's knowing, you know, as fee structures and programs up front or different things like that, if we can provide resources so that the cities are more compelled to look to those programs and have ways to talk about them in their communities to get more support behind them, that could be something that could be very valuable.
Other thoughts? If we wanted to, let's say you just simply wanted to say we wanted to find a way to invest $100,000 into 5 affordable housing projects this year, 1 in Minneapolis, 1 in St. Paul, and 3 in all of the other communities that we had. Is that something we could do? So the money gets out quickly. It helps. Maybe it helps the funding gap for some of these projects, and it's, you know, it brings people in that are may for various reasons have not been part of some of the other programs, but they, you know, so I think some of the communities in, you know, my area are just, you know, in Deb's area or Wendy's area that you know, that might have a project that that might be an option.
Mr. Chair and committee members, I think that the funding would have to fit into one of our programs for us to have authority to distribute it.
Okay.
So if we're talking about toolkits and things like that, of course we can do those things to help communities, but in terms of directly giving money outside of the programs that we have authority to run, we might run into some trouble there.
Okay. So there's not one that kind of fits something like that, one of our existing programs.
Mr. Chair, I'm not aware of one.
Okay. So I think my sense is that we'd like to do something for affordable housing, but I think there's not a consensus that SAC is the right way to do it. But I think we would like to find a way to invest some additional funds in affordable housing because of the importance that has with equity in the region, and we'll have to find a way to do that within our program. So maybe we'll have, if Lisa, maybe you could come back to us and let us know, or what might be the recommended way to do that, and then we can consider that in our final recommendation.
Mr. Chair. Oh,
Go ahead.
Let me just on 1.2. So under this time frame, we have 621 to 622. I noticed the time frames are a little bit different because it was based on what was being proposed. So eligibility or cities being able to sign up again for livable communities, I think will happen again in November. So, you know, if that's a barrier, it'd be nice, and if that might be one of the ways that we have to administer this, so it might be nice to just expand that time frame. And I know that Tara and Lisa and others have said that they'll work to figure out why cities didn't re-up. They do have some intel on that. And I think we'll see cities coming back, especially when I think we've got some extra things that we're trying to do for some of our smaller communities. We've really heard that. So I would just say yes to Lisa's suggestions, and then maybe look at that time frame so we're not limited to 622. I think if we were to go in this direction, we'd want to make that horizon just a little bit bigger, so that we could scoop up maybe a broader number of cities that would be participating.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, I would also offer that the local housing incentives account is our affordable housing account. It's a mechanism that we already have in place that leverages the additional funds that Minnesota Housing and other funders bring to the table. And it's, as I know some of our community development members have heard me say, there are no shortage of good projects there's only a shortage of funds. So we're not want for projects, and that would be the place to go to kind of hit those projects and knock them out the door. We do, there are some things I can look at regarding our participation in that, because we couple our recommendations with Minnesota Housing's recommendations. They go first and then we follow them, because they are the bulk of the funding program there. It may be that some participating communities, maybe who aren't participants today, may be eligible by the time we get to our recommendation pieces. But let me look at how that shaking falls out. This is a little bit of a different program in that the developers apply and not the communities. So it's a little different on who gets funded there, but I will take a closer look at how those dates fall out and be sure that we aren't over limiting on that, because we do want to be sure, especially in local housing incentives account, that those opportunities for affordable housing are distributed around the region. And you would have seen that in our most recent recommendation as well, that those opportunities were not just in the core cities, but also in many suburban locations as well.
And as we look at that item 2 was ranked 6th. The other piece that was on there was the Emerging Developer Program, which is a little bit separate from just purely putting money in the account. And I think that's just something we probably should we should have you think about as well, because, you know, we've met some of those emerging developers, they presented to us, and I think having more developers that are in that emerging category leads to more projects and that are directed at some of the communities that we'd like to find a way to impact as well. So we should just, I know we're thinking about potentially funding line 2 differently, but we may, and this is Mary and I can check in maybe offline, but we may need to think about some funds separately from a different source that would fund that piece. So, okay. I think we have a path forward on that one. We will need to get back to everybody as to what is what's the best option. So the 5th one that we have is the Maintenance Technician Training Program. I think the only question there was, would it make sense to have more money in there, or is it a similar issue to the Environmental Youth Jobs Program, where there's a limited amount of capacity to absorb people after they've completed the program?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, committee members, I'm Matthew Dake, Director of Bus Maintenance with Metro Transit. The similar barrier, we're trying to match the attrition of the mechanics, and we typically have an attrition rate of 10 to 12 technicians per year. So we want to have entry into the program and have a place for folks to land when they graduate and have a job. So that's what we're trying to balance. So more money wouldn't necessarily help us.
Okay, perfect. Any concerns with that program or questions? Leave it on the list.
Mr. Chair, this is Councilmember Muse. No concern, but the thing I would like to highlight is the outreach piece, really, to the underserved communities. And I know it's very challenging sometimes to recruit from them, but the extra efforts really will pay off in the future.
Yeah, and you know, we talked, actually, Councilmember Johnson mentioned this, I think, in one of the earlier items around the marketing item for transit. I think it was Councilmember Johnson, maybe Councilmember Barber, but that communication piece to communities of our diverse communities of color has come up on a few of these items. And I don't know if Jessica's still on, but we may want, I think it would make sense for us to be thinking about a more comprehensive communication approach and investing in that, so that, you know, whether we're using maybe ad space on buses or trains, et cetera, to advertise not only our MCO program, but some of these other opportunities that we're trying to make people aware of, and sort of take more of a whole council approach to that work. So,
Mr. Chair, I have just a quick follow-up on that. One way to do that may be really scaling up our communications department's multilingual skills. So there are more people, you know, of color who speaks Marine language in that department. They can really help with this and rethinking this.
Okay. Jessica, any thoughts?
Not specifically, but I mean, I would say yes to all of this, and that, you know, the things that we put in the proposal were just ideas, and that, you know, it would be a whole calendar, an editorial calendar that we would set up. We have some evergreen things that we would promote, like TAP and our transit information tools, but then as things as they come up, say if there is some recruitment for bus operators or this training program, absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mary.
Mr. Chair, given that we've got a few items on here that are related to our workforce development, we may need to add a little bit additional to support that team in doing the recruitments and those kinds of efforts. I probably see those as being maybe 2-year temporary positions to help us to both do the recruiting and develop those programs.
Okay. And Councilmember Johnson, I think, had a comment.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for, you know, again, those were my comments, and that was what I was trying to get at earlier, is that whatever we're trying to do, whether it be transit specifically, but more so beyond, you know, how do we reach for all of the things that we're trying to accomplish in equity, to Councilmember Musse's point. So, you know, and if we have to hire more people to do it, so be it. But, you know, some of these things are very similar. We're just working in different, you know, lines of our business. So I'm supportive of it, and, you know, I'm sure it'll be very successful.
Are there, and so just to be clear, the line number 2, I think our thinking is that we will look at some funds from our general fund reserve to make that particular line happen, or whether it gets funded the full 3.9 or some lesser amount will determine that. But are there any other priorities that we haven't talked about that people feel that we misallocated them, or we didn't put them in the right spot that we should really think about? Okay, going once. So we're really looking at these top 5 priorities. The 4th one is going to be changed to be a broader affordable housing piece, not related to SAC. But is that, so that's what we're looking at moving forward with, and then we'll fund line 2, rank 6 in a different way, and we'll bring all of that back to the management committee for a final review. But we'll dig in with some of the staff members to get a little bit more detail on what's going to get spent and make sure that the budget numbers are where they need to be. And as we've weighed in on some of these issues, we may have some additions for some people to coordinate some of this work or do some of this work, or as Councilmember Musse pointed out, maybe we should be looking at some, you know, if we don't have anybody in our marketing team that's, you know, multilingual, and maybe we should be looking at bringing somebody in for a period of time or permanently and funding that role to have a multicultural support for that. I don't know what we have on our team, but I thought that was a good point taken. So we will look at what we need to do to make all of these things happen, and we will look to adjust some of these budgets, make change to line item 4 around affordable housing, and figure out something that will work within the programs we have that's not directly funding SAC, or not SAC related, but affordable housing related. And we will bring that package back to this group for approval in 2 weeks, and then take it to the council for final approval.
So, Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify, make sure I understand. So we're looking at the these 5 in green, and that's the total. And then what did you say about line 2?
Line 2, I think we're looking at being able to fund that with moving money from our general fund reserve as opposed to using this this pot of money.
So then we've got $3.9 million allocated to equity projects. Then why aren't we doing more if we're funding that a different way?
We could. I think the question is for some of these other ones, were they ones that should be? One is some of these may get funded at a higher level as we look at investments. For example, instead of just doing 2 pilot projects, it probably makes sense to do more than 2. And what does that entail? But I mean, that's what I was asking. Is there any of these others that people would like to see included on the list? That was the question that was asked.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify so I understood. That's all.
Yeah, so that's why we opened it up. If there's any of that we're currently not thinking about that we should, then now's the time to talk about that and see if it makes sense. If there's people think we should add it.
Yeah, I'm going to make a plea for the one that came in, number 7, because the reality is that's one of those things that's that money will help drive some of these changes and freeing up how that transit funding or transportation funding happens. And I think it can go a long ways to help improving how we inform our 2050 plan. And I think that could be very impactful, both in how we look at things to avoid the mistakes from the past, but also laying out kind of a roadmap for the future of how do you really look at investments and into transportation infrastructure. I know TAB has really been working on this as well and been struggling, and I think it would be really helpful for even, whether it's us as the regional planners or TAB as the one who distributes federal money. I think we could actually really make a big impact if we do this right. So I would make a plea for that one.
Mr. Chair.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you. To Councilmember Barber's points, okay, so for line 2 that's in blue that came in at number 6, I think that's where we need to act, and what the amount is, I don't know. So I'm not supporting number 4, as I said, as it states for SAC grants, but I'm really good about putting more money into affordable housing. The point was made earlier. We know this. There's a pipeline of projects that have a lack of funding that are very worthy, that will help to, expand equity, but we just can't get those projects done because we can't fill the gaps. So there's an immediacy there that would go right to what we're trying to do. And to Councilmember Barber's as well, that was line item number 6 that came in at 7. That was one of my higher rankings as well. And I do appreciate the comment that seems like a lot of money to use for what we already know. And I raised my eyebrows at the line 2 because the consultant we pick would be very important. So I'll make this case. When we were doing our last discussion on Council of the Whole, one of the things that I said is I hope we can pick consultants when it comes to equity that are really experts in that role and they know how to get us to where we are trying to go. So there will be a lot of experts trying to understand equity, but I'm looking for experts that really authentically know, that are people of color themselves, and that helps us get to our goals because we'll be, I would think, hiring a consultant that is BIPOC to help us get there. And so it's not just the data of census blocks. It's not just the data of our riders, but back to the slides in the program originally, it's really, I think, systematically changing how we get input into how we build our projects and plan for our projects. So I've been involved in 2 years now, and what I know is everything that we're doing, we say, oh, we've got to reach into community. We need community input. We need BIPOC input. We need people that are being impacted input, but it's still really hit and miss, and council's trying to help with who we know in the community. We've done better. In some areas, we've done much better because the results of coming in and who filled out the survey, who was part of the meeting. And I know COVID slowed us down a little bit about in-person meetings, but I think systematically we really need to understand how do we establish permanency where people are at the table and there's a system by which people are at the table ready to go to help us make these decisions, transit has a direct impact on opportunity for people. And the other thing I've been saying for several months is when we are looking at lines and when we are designing systems, where's that next overlay that says, hey, and here's how people, you know, that are lower moderate income, people of color, here's how this line can help them get to jobs and education and opportunity and healthcare and whatever. So I think that's where we're going to need the help. Having the data is one thing, but there's a big gap there on having the perspective that I don't have, that we don't have yet, I think, sufficiently at Met Council to really understand how to do programming and engage those voices, not just for a time, but for, you know, transformational going forward. So I second what Councilmember Barber said on that. I think there's a longer play in that I think will have good payoff for us in the future.
And I would add, like as we've been doing the regional solicitation, the process and the scoring criteria, we've incorporated equity and we've been evolving it over time, but we want to see equity inputs from communities that make real change. And I think we're still wrestling with how to do that when you're looking at real technical things. And so I think that this could be, I mean, for federal funding and money coming in for transportation projects all over the region, it will help communities as they apply for those funds. They're going to have these conversations too. And if we can provide that framework, then, like I said, it's something that can impact the whole region.
And Deb, do you remember why we haven't ever included this in the transit and transportation budget, just as something that was important enough for them to spend budget dollars on?
There have been efforts, especially with TAB, on these discussions. We've did a series of workshops and stuff under the last council as we were building equity into the scoring criteria. But I think this is really more really to get at, you know, what are the levers that can influence equity when we're looking at investing money. And often we have a framework or have been provided a framework that we're working in, and we're trying to see what we can kind of pull apart of that to be able to make sure that we're factoring in equity and making sure that those investments get prioritized.
Mr. Chair?
Councilmember Lilligren?
Yeah, thanks. So that's my comment. Again, I was kind of the champion commenter. I guess I didn't realize they're going to be shared this broadly. But and so listening to Councilmember Barber, listening to Councilmember Johnson, you know, I'm hearing them talk about really, really important things. You know, Councilmember Johnson, especially with engaging BIPOC communities or communities that are sometimes left out of the conversation and decision making. That to me is something very different than an evaluation of equity within regional transportation investment. And then also to listen to Councilmember Barber talk about a framework of investment that emphasizes equity. Again, that is very different to me than an equity evaluation of regional transportation investment. And, you know, we're talking about these transportation investment decisions, which ultimately at the end of the day are political, right? And so if this were investing in a plan for increasing equitable investment or increasing equitable transportation investment in our region, that's a little more interesting.
Yeah.
But to evaluate something that we've been evaluating since I was on TAB a million years ago, it just doesn't seem like it's moving anything forward. And I feel like it's a significant amount of money to not really seem like it's moving something forward. Now,
well,
if
we do want to
we're
move
investing
things
in
forward.
engaging with communities that we're not engaging with, that's one thing. Or if it's creating a strategy for more equitable investment, that's another thing. But I just don't think we need to be investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in an equity evaluation in something which at the end of the day is political. It depends on the 36 people or whatever it is, 33 people sitting on TAB to make the decision. So that's why I made that comment, and that would be my objection to investing $400,000 in an equity evaluation.
Yeah. So Nick is on the line, I think. I don't know that Amy is. If Nick, if you want to
add
anything.
So a couple of things is that I think we mentioned last time about the 400,000. We could split this project up where we want to get funded and started this year. Our planning dollars are all allocated this year. We could, if we had this money at even at 200,000, we could get started, and then next year we could program some planning funds for the second phase. But I think the key is like it's as Councilmember Lilligren mentioned, there are political decisions, but a very detailed analysis about who gets to be on those boards, how those decisions get made, who is making them, are they equitable, and some keys to the transportation decision making would be a component of this that has sort of been missing, and that will result in, I think, the potential for changes in how the decisions get made about major investments, and that would also lead to the types of investments that are made. Not a lot has changed in how funding is allocated for transportation projects. We're at the highway system is 100 years old now, and a lot of things are the same. There's a lot of requirements about funding, and we're trying to get at that core so that in the long term there could be a change in how investment could be made.
So I guess the question is the title correct, where it's simply an evaluation, or is the work more of this sort of a strategy and beginning to figure out how to change things?
Mr. Chair, could we put the slide up for this? Because I've got the presentation and I'm toggling back and forth. And Councilmember Lilligren, I had sticker shock on this the first time. My comments on the first meeting on this one were like, oh my God, we're going to hire a consultant to do what? So we get more of the same, I think was, and that's not what we want, but it always feels that way. Oh, we're going to hire a consultant and, here comes in somebody, right? And it's kind of what we've been doing, but it's very well intended. So I really had to look at the slide and understand that actually both concepts we're talking about are represented in the slide. And so I really want transformation. I don't want to just put money into doing what we're doing so that we think we're doing better and we're not, right? It's too important right now. So the slide itself on this one, I thought, and I spoke to a couple of people that I came around. Now, the amount, I don't know. God bless the people who can figure out the magic number around this stuff. I just want the slide, the presentation that we were given. It's the PowerPoint with.
This is the first slide.
Slide number 8.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Mr. Chair.
And I mean, that was, if I may, just all I'm saying here is that, I've been toggling back and forth because as we discussed this is what was pitched. And so I'm trying to understand. So I think, the things that we're trying to do are very much stated here. And the reason I brought up the engagement piece is at least there would be measurement, but I don't want it to be a one and done. I want, to your point, I mean, God bless TAB, I served on it too. But I don't think it's representative of the region. And I'm not sure we have, all of the input that we could and the expertise around that we could. So, and then if you look here too, desired outcomes, specific recommendations and legislation for changing funding allocations and planning and programming processes to reduce structural racism, racial inequities. I mean, that's the goal. How we get there, maybe more things would be surfaced. So I don't know the right amount. I want to make sure we get a contractor that's not just who we pick from all the time. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but maybe it is somebody who I don't know, but I think we need to change things. So I'm leery about it, but I also know if we don't change the way we're doing things in a very serious, mindful, planful way, I don't think we should expect to get, major outcomes that are reaching our goals.
Councilmember Mosi?
To Councilmember Johnson and Lilligren's point, if we are going to really authentically reach out to people of color and communities and the self-educated community in a really very deep, authentic way, and if we're going to really rely on their expertise and hire folks from these communities to give us really hard critical input, then this is something that we can entertain. For example, I know that obviously, like Nick Thompson's team have a real hard time in reaching out to folks of color. that may be something that he can get help with, and to just reduce the barriers that his team is facing, to work with these communities. But in the way it's framed right now, it seems to me it's very vague.
So it sounds like just generally there's a sense that we want to do some work around equity and transportation. I think there's a question if it's simply an evaluation, whether that doesn't sound like there's support of us just doing an evaluation. But I think there's support to do more around the engagement side and thinking about how we get things changing so that there is more equity. Is that a fair summary? And I do apologize. We have about 4 minutes left, so we have to just be. We'll have to.
So, Mr. Chair, how about if we come back to the next meeting and take those top 7 and flush them out a little bit more in terms of giving you a little bit more detail about specifically what's going to be done in the outcomes we're looking at, and then the funding that each of them, sharpen our pencil a little bit on maybe making some a little larger, some a little smaller, and spending the 3.9, as well as maybe some general purpose levy to get those top 7 at minimum covered.
Councilmember Lee, did you have a comment?
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. I was just trying to say I would agree with that plan.
Okay. And do we capture sort of the essence of what people are hoping to get out of this particular line item? Is it more than an evaluation, or are some people thinking just an equity evaluation of what we're doing now is all we're hoping to accomplish?
I think it results in this, what Councilmember Johnson was referring to of a strategic plan, is really to get, we need to change these things at TAB, we need to change these things at the legislature,
Okay.
so that we can actually do something that's lives on past us.
Okay. I think
Chair. This is Cy Jordan, Chair,
Yep.
If I may. And so the Office of Equal Opportunity has been partnering with MTS around this. And so it is to result in what has been identified as those strategies. So recommendations and specific strategies for making those changes around allocations and planning is what the intention is. And we are in partnership as well with MnDOT and have started a work group to help move this forward. There are several identified groups that will be contributing with the consultant, including MCUB and DBE businesses, as well as the Equity Advisory Committee as well.
Councilor Lilligren, just any final thoughts if it's more of a change in direction?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. I really appreciate the conversation, and Cy, thanks for that. And the the idea of strategy, the idea of focused investment in engaging communities that haven't been involved in decision making, I think is great. But I'll point out the idea of recommendations for legislative changes, recommendations to TAB. Once again, those are straight up political decisions that we may or may not be able to influence at the end of this $400,000 investment. And so I just want us to be realistic about that. It feels a little status quo, or the way work's been done in the past. So I would look for innovative ways of accomplishing this. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Any last final thoughts? We have to adjourn in about a minute.
I would just ask if we can send out that list that had the priorities, how they were prioritized. That would be helpful as we look at the next one. I'd like, just because if there's funding left over, what kind of else, what were the other things that were kind of right on the edge? So I'm just curious.
Okay. All right. With that, and we are at 3:45, and I know Greg will send me a nastygram shortly, so we will stand adjourned. We have a fair amount of work to do. We'll bring this back to the group for approval in 2 weeks with significant more detail on the items that have been selected. So Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.